Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the idea of automating your business? It can seem so big and complicated that it's easier to do nothing at all. But here's the thing, automation doesn't have to be all or nothing. What if you started with just one task, one repetitive, time-consuming task that drains your energy? Imagine the relief of getting that off your plate. Automation isn't about perfection or overhauling everything overnight. It's about making progress, starting small, and tackling those tasks that slow you down. To help us dive into this, I interviewed Isaac Perdomo, founder of Opzer. He's helped businesses save over 20,000 hours through smart automation. And he's here to help us get past the overwhelm and focus on one task at a time and unlock the power of automation, starting with the pain points that you already have. So in this episode, we dive into the practical steps and examples to help you stop overthinking and start small and kick off your automation journey. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and today I'm joined by Isaac Perdomo. Welcome to the podcast, Isaac.
Thanks for having me, Alexis. I'm impressed you did that in one shot, so kudos to you.
There you go. So, and thank you so much for saying that every take that we've done. Yeah, it is awesome to have you on the podcast because I know how powerful automation can be, but I also know from my own businesses that trying to automate everything is often not the smart way to do things. And particularly when you start to go down that route, you can end up completely overwhelmed and all that sort of stuff. So I'm excited to dive in. But just before we do, help me understand, why have you ended up in the world of automation? Because I think I first came across you when I read, I think it was a blog post or an article that you did around really specific automations that you'd put in place. I think it was for accountancy practices. And that's been a big research project that I've been doing. And so as a result, I kind of picked it up and I was like, I love this. I love that you've got into that. But how did you end up there?
Yeah, so I studied engineering in college, and I always really liked technology and things of that nature. Also liked business. So funny enough, I graduated at the top of my class and couldn't find a job. So it was a tough marketplace. And I realized, hey, maybe I can do my own thing. My dad was an entrepreneur and an accountant. So I had some, inherence that I could take from that and lessons learned and some influences in my household. So I decided to start my business. Initially, actually, it was not really about automation. It was about marketing, funny enough, in the SaaS world. So the software industry is industry I wanted to learn about. I always liked software development, software engineering. And over time, I realized that I wasn't that good at the marketing, but I was really good at the automation. So over time, kind of shifted focus more to the technical side of that world. And, since my dad was an accountant, we really saw great strides with that particular industry. We decided to niche down, and, the rest is history.
Nice. Love that. Well, yeah. And I think what I really like is how kind of specific you've gone into that, because I think by having that knowledge of that sector and so on, it gives you such an advantage in terms of then being able to quickly get to the right answer. Because I think there's, one of the things that when I talk to practice owners that they struggle with is there are so many technologies out there and solutions for these things. Where do you even start? And often when I go to events and I see people on stage talking about, oh yes, an AI can help you with all these amazing things. And often people go, oh yeah, can you give me an example? And they're like, yeah, there's loads of examples. It's like, no, give me a really specific example. And they'll be like, you can use it to write emails. It's not very accounting. And so, it's often very frustrating that it's like, no, I want really specific examples. And I think that's what I really like about, you're very sort of pragmatic and tactical and so on. And I think so many business owners hold back from automating their businesses because it seems too big or because it seems complex. How do you help your clients get past that initial fear?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I'm kind of going to quote you here, but really start with a problem. Start with one. You don't have to think about your entire process end to end. You more than likely have a specific pain point, specific tasks, maybe around email, around your sales process, around the delivery, around your task management, whatever it might be that you find yourself doing all the time on a regular basis. So that's kind of like my advice. Like, you don't have to eat the world in one bite. You can just start with one automation at a time.
That's awesome. And I think I really like that approach because I think it aligns heavily to sort of how we talk about it in my business and AirManual, but also something we've talked about in the podcast generally is getting clear on what is that problem that you're going to solve and solve that rather than just go, oh yeah, I need to systemize my business. I need to automate my business. Is getting really clear on that. How do you help the clients to like quickly spot where are the processes that are prime for automation? Because I think a lot of businesses struggle to prioritize.
Yeah, definitely. There are different frameworks over time that have helped me crystallize the percentage of a client for us to assess where to start. One of them is actually from an author called David Jennings, author of
Yeah,
Systemology. You might be familiar with him in the system space. And he talks about the critical client flow, which is effectively like the steps that all your clients go through. Because fundamentally, what a business is like if you see it at a 30,000 feet foot view, you have effectively a machine that a human comes in with a need and ends up hopefully satisfied at the end. So in that process, he outlined several, phases that clients go through, whether it's first attention, how do you actually get in front of them? And in the world of social media, email, like there's a lot of automation that can happen in that world. Then goes to your sales, the way you either discover and propose your solution to that particular client. From there, usually you onboard and you bill. So there's a lot of things that can be done around client onboarding and billing as well. And then from there, how do you deliver and how do you get the client to either, I like to call it the three R's, which is either repeat, refer, or review. And so that like finishes the process of the critical client flow.
nice.
More often than not, we'll start with one of those like processes and dive deep into how they're currently doing it and take it from there.
Nice. And do you generally end up sort of focusing on processes that are sort of easy to automate or those ones that you think will deliver the most impact or a combination? Like, how do you approach that? And can you perhaps, if you could share like maybe a specific example of a client that you work with and kind of
Yeah.
how you approach that?
Yeah, there's definitely different flavors of it. If we feel like there's some quick wins that we can help them do, we definitely do that. I also like to think about, what's happening frequently in the firm that would prompt you to automate something. For example, just to give you an example, since you asked for one, there's a lot of data processing that happens in any accounting function because accounting is effectively a data function ultimately at the end of the day. And we've seen a lot of, for example, even senior accountants at times having to do like maybe like transaction matching of seeing I have these two data sources, maybe one that the client sends via email or spreadsheet that they shares with us and their QuickBooks account. I want to see like which transactions are currently there. That's an example that we do often. There's a lot of as well kind of document collection or data collection from clients. Examples as well around financial reviews is something that we're actually very interested in getting into of like sharing the financials of a particular client with an AI tool and seeing what it finds and taking it from there. So there's a lot of examples. It will ultimately depend on how frequent that particular task happens in the firm. If it happens weekly, monthly, we're looking at those recurring tasks because those ultimately are the ones they will get the most value from on a regular basis. And that's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, nice. And is there a particular example, perhaps a client that you work with, where there was a particularly impactful automation? Like, give us a sense of the kind of time or cost savings or whatever that you've generally seen are possible and what it took to kind of get there.
Yeah, so that example that I shared recently of transaction matching, that was something that was taking the client about 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 hours a week as an example. And that's something that we were sometimes, what's funny is sometimes these things that take accountants a lot of time could be like 3 lines of code or 3 steps in a Zapier in a Zap. So definitely we've seen it across the board, saving, dozens of hours a week. depending on the client. We like to also do a lot of things around sort of like practice management, which for us is, hey, the moment the client says, accepts the proposal, making sure that all those tasks are created in your systems, potentially assigned to the people that have to execute on those. If you've worked on your systems, maybe with a software like yours, Alexis, hopefully you have templates around those that give the team members the guidance they need and have the checklist of the things they have to go through, and even explaining in that same task, like the things that would happen. Hey, once you do this, the automation will do the next three things for you, and on and on. Like, hopefully that gives you, that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I think I really like that point around making sure that the guidance around, like, when you do this, here's what the automation's going to do for you. I think that's really important, because I think that part of the fear, I think sometimes with automation is, firstly, that am I taking away the sort of agency, the understanding of my team around how this actually works, and making it very black box. Like, it's like, I don't know what happens in there, but something happens, which
Yeah.
can have a knock-on impact. Firstly, in terms of maybe you start double handling things. Maybe that, there's an automation that does something, but the person doesn't know that, so they do it as well. Or maybe they get conflicting things because they contact the client about something that actually is covered elsewhere. And I think having that written out in your process and your guidance makes it so much easier for that handoff, so that you can get the benefit. And I really like that. And I also really like that, as you say, it can be 2 to 3 hours per day, particularly if you're picking a recurring process. That's a lot of time being saved. And particularly as you scale the business, that becomes, really, really big. Is there anything where you've had experience with a client where you've just seen like their approach to business generally changed in a way because
Yeah.
of having that automation?
Yeah. Two examples come to mind, and one, it's like, to your point, I mentioned earlier, 2 to 3 hours. I remember that particular team member of that accounting firm telling me that what he really liked about that automation is that it was going to spend the exact same amount of time, whether it was 50 transactions or 5,000. So sort of like building that scale into
Mm,
things where, hey, the client might double, might triple, might quadruple, and you might spend the same amount of time to complete the work you need to. So that's an example. I can also recall another client of mine making the comment that we're fine tuning a machine, and kind of having that insight of, hey, really that's kind of what we're doing as we get into accounting firms' processes and systems. We're kind of
mm,
trying to see it as a whole package and trying to understand what are the things going wrong, how can we fix them, and as we do that, we can like make this machine, work like clockwork, so to speak.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. I really like that, because I think that that's the attitude that business leaders need to shift to. We're discussing actually on your fantastic podcast, which we should plug at this point, Isaac. Where do people go find your podcast, which is excellent, and I've been on it, and you're a great interviewer.
Yeah, automation for accountants. Just look us up in YouTube.
Yeah, and so I highly recommend people go check it out. But I remember in that interview, and I'm not sure publishing schedule which of these episodes is going to come up first. It could be a race. But I remember in that we were talking about that importance of looking at your business as a system or a set of systems that you're building to
Yeah.
create this great experience for your clients. And I think automations are such a critical part of that, particularly when you're thinking about how do I go up in orders of magnitude. Are there any other aha moments that you've seen where like a business owner just seems to overcome these fears and embrace automation more?
I've seen a lot of like just simple examples of people being surprised when the automation runs for the first time. And they're like, oh my God, Isaac, this just kind of like went through successfully, and having like that positive reinforcement of,
Mm,
the things we've done. Yeah, that's what comes to mind at the moment.
nice. And one things that I'd like to sort of just delve into a little bit in the tactics, because I think when people are thinking about like what can I automate and whatever, I really want to bring that to life. So we're talking about something, a task that takes 2-3 hours, etc. I mentioned you wrote a fantastic article which was talking about the nine tasks that you can automate as an accounting firm. And in that, and I'll make sure I link to it in the show notes, because I thought it's very well written, very, very clear, and goes into the detail. Like in that, you went into each of the areas, like creating an invoice, and like here's some of the things that you can have that. Can you perhaps give us take any one of those 9 and just kind of delve in a little bit just to help us see how it's possible to end up with a particular process going from 3 hours and taking ages and being a frustration to being something that's super quick.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The sales process is one that we actually kind of like often dive into, and it's one that you brought up in our podcast, which is interesting. So let me maybe dive into that particular
Sure.
one. To give you an example, technically speaking, there's of course the best practice that need to happen in the call itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you start to think about it, there's also a lot of little things that happen around it to make sure that that takes place. The scheduling with the client, the recording and the summary of that particular meeting, making sure that the team members know who booked a call and when, that's kind of like linked and integrated with your calendar and with your video conferencing tool. We have clients, for example, also request access to the kind of the accounting file of the clients in the sales process. And there are tools also that can help you can like automate that and make that as easy as possible. Collecting documents from clients, potentially in that sales process as well. There's a lot of tools that you can use for that. So I like to suggest that when we are working with a firm and automating the sales process, we want to make it so that the firm owner just have to show up to the call, run that call, and schedule the next one if they have a 2 call system, show up to that second one, and that's it. And then everything else that needs to happen internally, whether it is, hey, the moment you check this off, that because you had the discovery meeting, that client's going to receive a form with all the documents they have to provide you with conditional logic, so that if they say that they don't have a business or that the business it's only 2 years old, it's not going to ask them for 3 years of returns because they don't have them. It's just going to ask them for 2, and building all that logic into the system so that, again, you as a firm owner only have to say, hey, all the systems are in place. I just show up to the call and do what the human's supposed to do, what at least for now we haven't been able to automate. And then everything else around it happens as automatically as possible.
Really like that. And I really like that as an example as well, because I think that that's a nice demonstration of that, if you like, the interface between the human part of it and the automation. And I also really like that point around, you kind of just want the human, the business owner, the salesperson, whatever, you just want them to be able to show up, do their thing, focus on the unique value that they bring in that moment, and then done and on to the next one. And it reminds me of, like, in my own business, I remember we were finding that after like demo calls, like discovery calls, that it was taking the team like up to an hour after having done a 45-minute discovery call to do the follow-up and to update the CRM and all those sorts of things. And I was just going, this is crazy. Like, of course we can automate these things. And it was so nice that, because, as you say, there's lots of different systems, and we used, we leveraged like AI tools for summarizing notes and integrations from Zapier, from our tool, like from our process checklist and AirManual over to put these stuff in CRM and post it in the Slack channel, all these sorts of things. And it changed from, a painful activity to do the follow-up to actually everything being really easy. And it meant that, exactly as you say, like the people just show up and do their best work, and they're able to move on to the next one, which means that essentially their efficiency, or like the amount of productivity they can do, doubled as a result of that. But also they enjoy the work more as well. They enjoy it because that's what they really like, is talking to clients about what are the challenges they've got and how can we help, and whether we're a good fit and where we'd start and all those sorts of things. And I think, it makes me think, like, one of the things that I love doing is like doing podcast interviews like this or speaking on stage. There's very little of the stuff around the edges that I then also love that much. And so as much as possible, I just kind of pairing it off until that's the only thing I do. Right. And so I like that as an attitude to see the automation. What about for like clients where, or prospects of yours, where they perhaps feel like automation has to be perfect or completely right from the start? Like you talked there about having the conditional logic that if it's this, this many years or whatever, then it does things slightly differently. But you can take that to the nth degree, right? And at some point you've got to draw a line and go, yeah, it's okay that it's not perfectly tailored to their situation. Like, it's good enough. How do you kind of manage that with your prospects and clients?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Ultimately, some accountants are so detail oriented. They want the exact details to be right. I hear that. But ultimately, I think that the process of building systems, whether it is with process with automations, it's inherently iterative.
Mm,
And I think people have said this before, but if your B1 is not embarrassing, you launched too late, right? So really, like, be okay with suboptimal. That's one of my sayings, and I have internally with my partners. Like, we have to be okay with suboptimal. Like, our
mm,
system is never going to be perfect. Business is never going to be perfect. None of this stuff and these automations and this process are going to be perfect. But if we build a version one that we can potentially be proud of, and as an issue comes up, guess what we're going to do? We're going to go back to the system and fix it so that that little issue, that little data point that your team member entered and you kind of broke the automation, or that little thing or the little task that you delegated and they ask you a question, how can we take that feedback and kind of close the loop so that, sure, B1's not going to be perfect, but we're going to kind of improve from there.
nice. Yeah, I think that's so important, that continuous improvement process. And I've had it in my own business where we've set up automations and then later on down the line something changes or whatever and it breaks and falls over. How do you encourage your clients to kind of manage and deal with that? Because one of the things that I've seen is where you take a business that perhaps has no automation and then put a lot of automation in, you can create a need for automation expertise in the business,
Yeah.
which itself can cause stress and problems. Like, how do you deal with that? Or what do you
Yeah.
recommend that businesses do to avoid ending up stuck with a load of stuff that's just broken?
Yeah. So, of course, as I mentioned earlier, it's an iterative process. So,
Mm,
you don't have to go fast. And that's something we've noticed over time, that we'd rather just kind of take it slowly, one step at a time, one process at a time, precisely because some of those systems might break later. So the more we try to like crunch into a particular time frame, the more we'll have like some of that residue of potential troubleshooting that needs to happen. But we do our job to try to document the internal automations that we do so that people are clear on what's going on. What we've found personally, especially if it's a little bit more modern firm, there it's almost always some person willing to learn some of these
mm,
technical things. And especially now that it's like some of these things can be really aided with AI and no code and visual tools. We don't have to 90% of what we do is doesn't require code at all. So sometimes a potentially an ops manager, an accounting manager, maybe one of the accountants or the bookkeepers can like pick up the skill
nice, yeah.
if they're interested, so that 6, 12 months from now, maybe they don't need us anymore at that point, and at least they have someone in house that can continue to maintain their systems from there.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of the systems that you're using, I think I've mentioned Zapier as one that I've used internally in my own business automations and so on. Are there particular tools that you'd like? Yeah, here's some ones that are worth a look, or that you tend to use regularly with your clients.
Definitely. We have a little framework around sort of like the automation tools we use. We call it Brain, just to make it easy to remember. But it's effectively bases, robots, apps, integrations, and neural nets. Neural nets is just a fancy term for AI because we had to, make the acronym work. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, if I were to say like in the order we usually look at them, first we look at apps, because more often than not, sometimes people are not leveraging the apps to the best of their ability.
Mm,
And there are things they can automate that their apps already have built in. Like, I don't know, sending a particular report from QuickBooks, or automating certain things with their task management or their CRM. They have workflow builders built into some of those tools that are often very powerful. So usually we start there. From there, we started looking at integration. So this is where usually something like Zapier will come in. There's other more advanced versions like Make, which is kind of its closest competitor that you might have heard of. There's other NAA, Pybring, among other platforms that are Zapier-ish like,
mhm.
but have some pros and cons. From there, usually we find a lot of need for databases, which is where the B comes in, often either to store data for the purposes of reporting, or to store data for the purposes of maybe a more complex workflow that you need to be able to really get it done. You're going to need some data points that you need to kind of look up and fine on a regular basis. And then from there, the two pieces at the top are robots, which is fancy term for robotic process automation, or simple term for robotic process automation, which really is the solutions that you implement when the integrations are not available. And this is very common in like the tax software world, where there's a lot of older legacy software that doesn't quite integrate, but you can still program a robot to actually do the thing that the human would do in a desktop, whether it is, open up the software, click here, click tap, move your mouse here, punch these keystrokes, etc., or look at the screen, visualize it. Now we have sort of that ability with the fifth tool in the toolbox, which is N for neural AI, which really now allows us to understand what we're looking at and also kind of reason and add some level of human intelligence into the workflows that previously were very rules based and now can have a little bit more leeway for judgment.
Nice. Really like that. Thank you for taking us through that model, because I think that's such a helpful lens and framework for anyone to kind of use when they're looking at improving their business, and particularly if you're a bit of a geek for this stuff or you're an ops manager or whatever, thinking through, and particularly in that order, is really powerful, because I've definitely seen that, like, as you say, people not leveraging the apps that they've already got and instead looking down the route of integrations and so on. So I really like that. Unfortunately, we're coming up for time, but I've got some quick fire questions for you if you're up for them.
Let's do it.
So for these, just one sentence answers, please. First question: what one thing causes most stress for you?
People that waste my time.
What should everyone look to automate first if they haven't already?
Your sales process.
What should people never automate?
I feel back and forth with this one, but I'm going to say client conversations.
What book or podcast has been most pivotal for you in changing your life for the better?
I really like this one. We mentioned this author earlier, but it's Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell.
Nice. And what's the one thing you want business leaders to take from this episode?
Start early and improve one step at a time.
Perfect. Love it. Good job. Well, I'll make sure that we've got links to Isaac's LinkedIn profile, his YouTube channel and podcast, also his article that I've referenced a few times, and his website at opzer.co. That's opzer.co. Are there any other links or resources that you'd like us to highlight, Isaac?
Yeah, we send a monthly newsletter at this time, considering making it weekly. So opzer.co/newsletter, if people want to join that and receive some of the latest news around accounting, automation, and technology.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's so great. And from when we've been talking before, that one of the other things that I've been working on is this kind of playbook of best practice SOPs, particularly for accountancy and bookkeeping. And it's like at some point we'll do them for other industries and verticals, but we've been specifically working on this one. If that's something that people are interested in getting, you can email me, alexis.kingsbury@airmanual.co. Get involved. Let me know what process in your business that you'd love to get a best practice template for and why, and I'll send you one over. But otherwise, Isaac, thank you so much for joining me. You've been absolutely awesome. And to everyone else, until next time, have fun.
All right. Have a nice one.